Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Today we welcome Anthony Corsaro, an entrepreneur, investor, and regenerative agriculture evangelist whose mission is to help heal our people and planet through ventures that inspire the production and consumption of healthy, nutrient-dense foods. This is a powerful conversation, including Anthony's personal, intense health journey and how he walks the walk when it comes to food as medicine. Let's jump right in.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. I'm excited to be joined by Anthony Corsaro with ReGen Brands, Outlaw Ventures, and numerous other things. But I'm going to give him the opportunity to tell his story and introduce himself in that manner. But welcome, Anthony. I'm glad you could be here today.
Thanks, Monty. Appreciate you having me, man. Excited to be here.
So this guy here is a little nervous because Anthony has a podcast himself. So this is going to be. I hope I can keep up to his standards during our time together. So
I'm fighting some nerves back as well. You know, your legend precedes yourself, and I'm just excited to be here and grateful for the opportunity.
Well, people say I cast a big shadow, but that isn't. It's my body size more than. Well, Anthony, tell us your story and how you got started and how that all wove into what you're doing now to do everything possible to bring regenerative agriculture forward. I'd love to hear it, and I'm sure everyone else would too.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of a combination of family history and personal journey, right? So my grandfather was a second generation Italian-American orphan in the Midwest in Indianapolis, Indiana. And he started hustling produce because that was one of the few economic opportunities that he had. And basically, over many years, my father and uncles and cousins turned that business into a regional produce distribution powerhouse in the Midwest. I grew up in that business. I worked every single job you can imagine out in the warehouse, from sanitation to selector to receiver to whatever. But, you know, I kind of swore it off. I went off to play college football. I had a couple of jobs right out of school. And then I rejoined the business after we sold it to private equity in 2017. And I was part of the family management team that basically were the custodians of the next generation of the business and helped kind of continue the next wave of growth. Had a lot of success, but I stepped away at the end of 2020 because I have an autoimmune disease. And through a decade plus long journey with the disease, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about our healthcare system. I learned a lot about our food and agricultural system. And really, I became a huge fan of food as medicine, and I became a huge fan of regenerative agriculture. So, my passion in the space really is the culmination of this 100-year family legacy in food and food systems, and this intense health journey where, food as medicine and healing myself through food was a big piece of it.
That's interesting. And we have a mutual story. My wife, autoimmune disease, is part of the reason why we began such a hard look into how we're farming and regenerative ag practices, and why we do our grass-fed and pastured poultry business direct to consumer today. So interesting commonality there. We'll dive into that a little bit. Yeah. So I find that interesting. So you said your dad or your granddad, Italian orphan, you said?
My granddad.
So interesting how many people of Italian descent got into produce distribution around that time. I mean, and if you look at all the powerhouses today in California, mostly are of Italian descent. So it's interesting. Why that connection? It's fascinating, but that had to be quite a legacy. And talking about your family selling that to a venture capital firm in 2017, what was that like for your family to go through that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, exiting to private equity was the best way for my dad and my uncles and the owners to really capture the value they had created over the many, many years. It was the best way to take care of the next generation and let them work in the business, but not have the financial stress of, not having some sort of liquidity event or exit event. And, it was interesting. I certainly learned a lot about the capital markets and investing, and that kind of helped set me on the path that I'm on now, trying to inject capital into the food system. So I just greatly appreciate the opportunity. And the legacy piece is interesting, right? Because I felt compelled to be a part of the business, and I could walk into that company today and do some of those jobs at a very, very high level, having not worked there since late 2020, just because it's in my blood. But it was hard to leave. It was really hard to leave, and it was the right thing to do for me to leave, but that made it tough.
Well, that's interesting. And probably you'd reached a point where, everything gets bigger all the time, right? It's just the way of business. And you look at, hey, I got a bird in the hand here with the venture capital, and they've got probably the equity behind them to help propel that business to the next level, right? Where if the family had chosen to do that, they could wind up with a big, risk it all and wind up with nothing. And was that kind of the balancing act that was going on there?
Yeah, for sure. And what private equity is really good at is managing debt and managing how the money flows. And the hardcore produce operators that ran that business for a long time were good at doing that at the scale of their business. But that entity, we were basically the platform acquisition for a roll up in that space that now is 10 plus entities. And to manage that level of complexity and integration and debt capital to acquire those businesses, it's not a skill set that you typically have in-house at a business. So I don't know if when we sold, we had the full scope. We felt like we had good partners coming on board that wanted to grow, that were going to let us run the business and let us be the experts in the space and not try and dictate that to us, which they certainly have been. But yeah, it's different skill sets, right? And that's the beautiful thing about business in all facets is it's bringing people and entities together that are complementary, that can make good things happen.
And I think it's important to note in the capital world, there's a lot of, we're familiar with the angel investing startup type of thing, thanks to popular TV shows and that kind of thing today. But there's a real big interest in helping family businesses or generational businesses have an exit plan, which they haven't, so the capitalist has an opportunity for a steady, return on money. But then, like you said, in this case, it sounds like they were putting multiple businesses together to create a vertically integrated ecosystem within their different businesses that each one of you 10 would not have been able to do alone. Correct?
Exactly. And
okay, I'm laying that foundation because that's going to come in here later. I'm assuming. I'm reading between the lines here. Anyway, so talk to us then. The autoimmune disease in 2020. Share with us what you're comfortable sharing there. And how you determine that food has an impact on that.
Yeah, super comfortable sharing all of it, honestly. And I think every time I do, I get at least one person that reach out that says, I'm struggling with something similar. I really appreciate you sharing that. And can you help? So I think it's important to share it. So I have a disease called hidradenitis suppurativa. It's a little bit of a mouthful.
You learned how to spell that. I mean,
I put it into Google every time, Monty, and then I just copy and paste it, so I never have to learn how to spell it.
You just hope that autocorrect works. Normally it doesn't, Okay, say that again slowly.
Yeah, hidradenitis suppurativa. It's called HS for short.
That's easier, yes. Huh.
And it's a skin-related condition. And for lack of a better way to explain it, you basically get large acne, boils, zits, lesions that are painful, uncomfortable, not good looking, and in places you don't want to get them. I'll leave it at that. And basically, I started getting them around 14 in high school. And it bothered me, and it was part of my life, but I had so much going on in high school and college between, social life and sports and academics that it didn't take up a large part of my time. But I think as I entered adulthood, I just had a really strong intuitive feeling like, hey, this is not natural. This is not right. This shouldn't be happening. How do I fix this? And I explored every single hardcore Western medical dermatologist kind of route. I even went to the guru guy outside of Detroit. That's the leading dermatologist. And, kind of got a doomsday diagnosis. He basically just said, hey, you're kind of phase 2 out of 3. There's nothing you can do. This whole like cleaning up your diet thing's like not going to help you, but like good luck. And kind of just patted me on the butt and sent me out the door. But thankfully, I found functional medicine doctors and naturopathic medicine.
Mhm.
And I found an awesome naturopath outside of Denver named Dr. Ashley Bisco at Attune Functional Medicine. And she changed my life. And she had done the work, her and her partner, and really invested in learning about HS and specifically helping people with HS. And there were three big components I had to overcome. One was the food piece, one was a stress piece, and then the big unlock was a mold piece. I had a really, really bad mold toxicity issue where I'd had some mold exposure. I needed to remove myself from the exposure and then detox the mold. And so while I'm still very disciplined about diet, exercise, stress, etc., and it has a huge part in it, that mold piece was a huge unlock to just my overall kind of healing and vitality.
Very, very interesting. So, similar story with my wife, where we were working with a naturopath there in Fresno, and she had been on. My wife had seen her and such, and actually watched her on the local TV talk about this blood test that can identify foods that you're intolerant to. And she went to her naturopath and said, "Hey, why haven't you done this with me?" Well, okay. So, but I think the biggest thing anybody listening to this can take away, and I bet you'll vouch for this, is that you are responsible for your health, and you have to take charge of that. And she just searched everything, everywhere, and with the premise of God didn't design my body to destroy itself internally, so something was happening to make that happen. So good for you. And so that's been life changing, and the food side of that has definitely piqued your interest in regenerative. Why?
Yeah, I mean, the more that I learn about it, the more impassioned I become and the more invigorated and inspired I become. And it was just one of those things that it's totally caught me and it's captivated my attention and curiosity. And it hasn't been easy at all times learning and working in the space. I think the space is still really underfunded and really nascent. And, we have a lot of problems to solve like anyone does. But it's been so fulfilling and so worthwhile. And I've just followed that. I've just kind of got up every day and done my work. And when I've looked at all those bricks stacked up, it looks pretty good. So I feel good about it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, well, tell us a little bit about the efforts that you have going on right now. I'll just let you take it away in the different ventures and branding and all that you have going on. Share with us what you got going on.
Yeah, the question I get on most intro Zoom calls is like, well, I looked at your LinkedIn. It looks like there's a lot of things. Can you explain, what exactly is going on here? And the journey is I really dedicated myself to the space full time in January of 21. So it's almost been, 3 full years of working in the space. And I've done some entrepreneurial stuff. I've had a W-2 role in the space, and I've also done private investing that whole time. Right. And to spare the full story and all the details, a lot of my work has revolved around regenerative food systems investment. So investing across the entire supply chain. The organization I had the W-2 role at was called RFSI, or Regenerative Food Systems Investment, which is the leading news and events, provider of investing content in the space. And really, Monty, what I saw was that we as a movement have something I call upstream disease. And this might be a little contentious. I'm sure there'll be some farmers that listen to this episode that maybe have some choice words for me. But, yes, we are trying to change the agricultural practices at the farm gate. But I think sometimes we try to just myopically solve those problems only by changing the farm gate, when there's infrastructure and brands and all these other things that are in the whole supply chain that help dictate, the outcomes at the farm gate. And so what I saw was a real dearth of education, understanding, financing, attention, content, all of the above for what I would call the downstream supply chain in the regen ag conversion conversation, right? So we're spending a lot of time talking about soil carbon. We're spending a ton of time talking about the farmers and what they need and production and debt, and all those things are awesome. And we need to spend twice as much time and invest 10 times the amount of money, but we are not spending nearly enough time on infrastructure and brands. And, I had built up a portfolio of 22 private angel/family office investments. And I just saw an opportunity to lend my skill set to a group of people in terms of the CPG founders and operators that I thought were under-resourced, misunderstood, and needed, a champion. And so the The media work with the ReGen Brands media entity, the podcast, the newsletter, the blog, et cetera, is really to be a B2B source of content for food system stakeholders, right? To educate them on what is going on in the world of regenerative CPG. Outlaw Ventures is a source of capital and expertise and relationships to help those folks grow their businesses and impact. And then the ReGen Coalition is the third entity, and that is right now an LLC, but it will become a 501c6 trade association. And my partner in crime on the podcast, Kyle Krull, he started the ReGen Coalition really as a grassroots movement to bring brands together to co-promote, cross-pollinate customers, do end caps, execute at retail together. But the bottleneck that we're really trying to solve with the ReGen Coalition right now is, there's no one out there doing consumer-facing work that's driving increased awareness and increased demand of products, right? You have Farmers Footprint and Kiss the Ground. They're doing awesome work at a high level about the awareness of regenerative agriculture and why it's important. But what we need to do is channel that into the mom in Naperville, Illinois, shopping for her groceries, actually buying regenerative products.
Very good. And more than just a sticker, right? And taking and putting another sticker, because some of the packaging really needs to be bigger in order to fit all of the certifications on it anymore. I really think, so some of our research that we did when we were looking in our direct consumer business was we found out, and this was a long time ago, and I'm sure that it's gotten worse, but only 52% of moms purchasing groceries believe the labels. And that's a huge problem, right? So rather than just another sticker, you're looking at, what if we create that brand? And then that brand stands for the value proposition we're delivering. Is that where you see this more going?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities, right? And whether it's Grateful Grays, what you're doing, and it's really a pure direct-to-consumer play, or it's a brand that's nationally in retailers like a Force of Nature Meats, there's different ways to promote and make people aware of regenerative agriculture and drive purchase, right? But the certification landscape is interesting. We talk about it a lot on our podcast. I salute the work of all the certifying bodies and really what they're trying to accomplish. I think there's 6 that have a real shot of getting mainstream adoption. And I actually have a blog post coming out about that pretty soon. But at the end of the day, the certifying bodies are not marketers. And so it's amazing that they're providing the service to the brand and to the farmer to certify the land and to certify the product. But ultimately, if the consumer isn't aware it exists or doesn't know what it means, we haven't done the full job. And so that, I think, is the gap that we see the ReGen Coalition playing.
Very interesting. So, yeah, one of the reasons, and I just had this discussion with another farmer before we sat down here, is, we are in a micro niche in that direct to consumer. And the only thing that's really limiting us from going bigger in integrating livestock on the land or having, more, heritage grains, whatever it might be that we can produce, is just simply what we can sell, because there's no outlet that allows us to get the value back to the farm that we need, other than doing it all ourselves, going to direct. Well, if 1 million of us are doing that independently, the economics of scale of the distribution, the processing, all the things that need to happen to get that to a consumable item for, a family, extraordinarily inefficient. The big food companies have got this nailed. So, we have to be somewhere in between, and that really is the gap you're looking to solve, the problem you're looking to solve.
Yeah, for sure. And, I spend the majority of my time focused on the emerging brands. I would call those like sub $50 million in revenue. So not the PepsiCos and the Coca-Colas and the General Mills of the world. Obviously, I know exactly what's going on with those folks and follow that space because that's in the ReGen Brands landscape. And I salute the work that they're doing. I mean, some more so than others. And it's going to have amazing impact on large swaths of acreage. But to me, the most dynamic solutions are these emerging brands that have ReGen built into their core, that have much more what I would call high integrity regenerative supply chains. And if we can grow them, right, if we can scale those businesses and those supply chains while maintaining that level of integrity, that is the food system that I think a lot more people want to support and want to have.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. The ASN team is hands-on, digging in and invested in regenerative agriculture. Along with the proper plant nutrition and biologicals to boost your soil microbiome, we provide the ideas and implementation guidance to support you on your soil health journey. So stop farming the same way and contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm.
That's a great point. So let's break that down a little bit. Let's say a farm that's going direct to consumer now, they kind of limit out based on their sales ability. And for every dollar, right, they have roughly, let's say 75 cents of cost in there. But that 25 cents, is being spread over what would in a traditional, or not traditional, but the current modern supply chain, that 25 cents would be spread over the farmer, the processor, the logistics, the distributor, the store, all those things, which there's far more than 25 cents of margin in a standard food dollar, right? So that isn't going to work. So how do you create this? Consumers willing to pay more, right, for the right thing, but how do you help get those costs out of that system to make more margin for everybody involved in the value chain?
Yeah, you got to make the supply chain simpler, right? So you got to make it more direct relationships with the farmers and cut out as many middlemen as possible. And I think it's a lazy argument to always say middlemen are bad. I come from a middleman business, and I can tell you that the margin that we make as a produce distributor, we earn every penny of it, right? So I don't want to make that claim, but I do think in certain commodities, we've gotten a little out of control. I don't see produce as one of those, but some of the more ingredient commodities like a cacao for chocolate or something like that, we've gotten kind of crazy with the amount of hands it touches before it gets to the end consumer. I really like the aggregator model, and I see a lot of opportunity for regional partnerships or integration of companies or collaboration, whatever you want to call it. So I'll just give you an example, right? Like Jamie at Hickory Nut Gap on the livestock side, he aggregates from, I don't know, however many farmers. I want to say it's more than 100, maybe 200 plus. And a big issue, Bonnie, that you understand from the livestock world is whole carcass utilization, right? Like I got to make money on that whole cow and that whole animal. And so if all the farmers that Jamie sources from were just selling direct to consumer, it might be really hard to sell all their grounds, right? They could sell the ribeyes and all the steak cuts really easily, but they might have a bunch of grounds left over. And so what Jamie can do as an aggregator is he can go to somebody like Applegate and he can put that meat into the Do Good dog, right? And he can create a market that hopefully is higher margin, higher throughput, more efficient for all those regenerative land stewards that are producing regenerative livestock. And I think we need to do that 1000x, right? That's just one small example, and I could give you others. But systems like that, to me, are a beautiful thing that we need to try to replicate regionally and across the country.
Now, let me ask you this, and this is a tough question here, but would you agree that regenerative farming is really rethinking how farming is done?
For non-first generation farmers, absolutely.
Okay. A first generation farmer, they could just start that way and be like, this is the way farming's done, right?
Right,
okay.
Right.
So it's really rethinking how farming in total and with regardless of the farmer is done. Now, at the same time, if we're rethinking the food supply chain, the buy sell mantra that we have now will eventually create another version of commoditized value add. Organic started, in my opinion, the way really regenerative is thought of as now. Okay. And organic devolved into, you can only use these certain inputs and, check the boxes of the certifiers, and yep, there it is, stamped for organic. And then we sell it through the same, distribution network and everything else, just different brand name with some labels on it. How do we didn't really rethink that, did we?
No.
If we're rethinking the supply chain. If the dollars, if there's not I contend there needs to be a profit sharing motive on the supply chain back to the farmer, to where everybody rewards, not just all of the in between trying to buy it from the farmer as cheap as possible, which has been the commodity driven route for decades, right? Am I, how can that happen? Are you adamantly opposed to that? Let's have a discussion around how that, what the profit motives are in that supply chain, and should that be different or rethought somehow?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you there. But I'd add the asterisk of we have to deal in the realities of today, right? So like, how do you help these companies survive and thrive while also trying to build some more of those innovative models that maybe the rest of the world isn't ready for yet? Like in my world of better for you premium CPG, like the model is you go into UNFI and then you go into Whole Foods, or you go into KeHE and then you go into Sprouts. And that is the big break of national distribution for all these young brands. And so, you know, there's other ways to skin that cat, but it's really hard to not do that, right? If you have an organic, natural, regenerative, whatever, premium CPG product. So I agree. And I think there's various entities that are taking various different approaches. And what I actually see is not a lack of innovative thought, but I see a lack of resources going to the innovators to actually iterate and do the work. You know, which is why I'm so passionate about the investing pieces. To me, there's still not enough capital out there for all the innovative farmers that want to do regen. But I would contend that there's even less for all the people that want to build markets for those farmers. And that is the issue that I think I'm trying to solve.
Okay, so let's just kind of break it down, and I'm going to throw off some examples here of ones that I think are in very unique, different from each other distribution models. So White Oak Pastures, large regenerative, direct to consumer, grassroots farmers cooperative. So consolidated farmers with their own processing going direct. Butcher Box, venture capital funded, buying it from certified providers, but then that's it. You know, then you've got on the other hand, shoot, there was another example I was going to think of, but name those examples and what you think the pluses and minuses are within this space to get make regen the number one food choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like the whole practices versus outcomes based for what is regenerative. It's the same thing applied to the business models, which is if the outcome is the farmer's getting more of the food dollar, then you're doing something right. And so I think there's better and worse ways to do that. But ultimately, I think when I'm evaluating business for investment, right, part of do they have a regenerative, air quotes, supply chain is, are they working with the farmers and directing more of the food dollar back to the farmers than a conventional business? Like that is a piece of the requirement to me. And you know, I know the least about Butcher Box business model of the three that you mentioned, but I bet that they're also at least still putting more food dollar back to the farmer than the conventional supply chain. But I bet the other two you mentioned are doing much more of that. So to me, that would be the main outcome metric to track versus getting too in the weeds on the how-to, even though I do think we could do that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to say those are kind of, you know, three that popped in my head that are getting approach. So it's a direct consumer, right? Which is different than the, you know, through the traditional grocery store model. Persistence of grocery store model. A lot of grocery stores are struggling, and just was on the phone with a executive vice president of a large Midwest grocery store yesterday, and mentioning the problem with the younger audience, getting them to come to a grocery store, getting them to purchase anything that they have to cook, not knowing how to cook. How is that dynamic going to enter into the regenerative space? And what do you see there as far as, to shorten up the question, between generational differences and brick and mortar and its persistence in the future?
Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of disruption. There already is a lot of disruption. You know, I think what the grocery e-commerce boom and bust of the venture cycle showed us is that a lot of the parts of the food system are not venture backable, right? It's not, they're financeable and they're investable and you can make great return on them, but they necessarily can't always fit into the return expectation or the time horizon of true venture market rate returns. In terms of grocery operators, you know, when I was at Indianapolis Fruit, when I left, we were servicing 2,500 retail doors in 20 states. So I know a little bit about the independent retailer, at least. And the biggest mistake that I saw people make as a service provider to those folks was they tried to be the same as the big box stores, right? So in grocery, there's only 2 or 3 things that you can really, do: price, quality, and service, right? And you're never going to beat Kroger and Walmart and Aldi and Dollar General on price. So you damn well better beat them on quality and service. And I think that the independent grocer a lot of times makes the mistakes of trying to win on price. You need to compete on price because you are competing with those customers. And if you're way out of whack, your customer's going to notice and not give you their business. So I get that. You got to be competitive, right? But like, they better walk into your department and you better have the friendliest staff and you better have the cleanest department and you better have the best quality product that's above those competitors. And I still think, people want to experience going to the grocery store. Like, e-commerce is booming, online grocery is booming, pickup is booming, but the vast majority of people still grocery shop at the grocery store. And I don't see that changing for the next at least decade or two. Especially, I think, the foodies and the people that care about what they eat that we are targeting in the regen space. So, I think brands need to set themselves up to, one, be omnichannel, right? So you have to have an omnichannel approach. You have to have a brand that's able to execute both at retail, but through e-commerce, whether that be your own channel or others. And then I think retailers just need to be different. How many people have we been going to their grocery stores and it looks the same as it did when I was 10 or 5 years old? That was over a decade ago. Like, you can't sit on your heels here in any part of business or life. So, my overall gusto for just innovation and trialing and experimenting is strong for that group of people and also just anyone, right, in business.
So who is the buyer for regenerative brands? You mentioned foodie, and in not necessarily for regenerative food. Who is the buyer and why are they buying?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on the brand and the commodity, right? I think that looks different for coffee versus ice cream versus grass-fed, grass-finished ribeyes, right? But the majority of grocery purchases happen by a woman, usually the mother of the household. So you're looking at, millennial plus moms, millennial boomer moms, right? That's still the person making the majority of the grocery purchases. And there's different triggers that are going to cause that person to change the way that they buy things. And I think the way that we talk about it a lot, and what I've learned a lot about, is you have to still be really great at the core fundamentals. It's got to taste great. It's got to be within range from a price perspective and not totally like shoo people away, right? And it's got to deliver some sort of health and wellness benefit that they understand that they're getting for that product. And it's got to meet whatever level of convenience that product is supposed to meet, right? So like a steak has a different convenience threshold than coffee, but it's got to hit those 4 table setters, whether it's regenerative or not, because that's the world that we live in. And then from a regenerative standpoint, it's really about tying some of those key purchasing drivers to regen on the back end. So, hey, this is more nutrient dense, right? And we're selling you the health and wellness benefit of, it's going to make you skinnier. It's going to help you focus. It's going to make you sleep better, whatever. But then explaining on the back end, it's because it was grown regeneratively or produced regeneratively.
All right. So you just set up a great thing here. Okay. four things people are looking for. Let's give a score. Okay. Let's grade the regenerative space now. Okay. As you think across the entire landscape, and there's going to be, just like every class, you have your A students and you have your, you should have been held back students. Okay. So, tastes great. I'm going to give a grade. Now, you realize I'm biased. Most of my is going to come from the meat perspective. You're going to have more of the produce perspective, but I'm also aware of the produce perspective. So in addition to taste grade, I think when it comes to produce, also has to be an appearance portion of it, because it's a taste when they purchase it. I'm going to say on the meat side, I'd give us a strong C- on that, or worse. And I'd say on the produce side, probably a B- because of appearance. I don't think you have the greenness, you have the bug issues, you don't have evenness of size, but the taste great on the meat side. It's lean. People are not used to it. It typically has a gamey flavor. It's got a yellow fat. That's weird. I'm not used to that. And there's just a taste profile that people aren't used to. They've become used to blah. right?
Mhm.
How would you grade that, the meat and the produce sector? And maybe you're a
Oh,
little easier grader. I'm writing it down. I'm C minus and B minus.
yeah, I might go B minus on taste. And appearance is really hard because that's so different from a steak versus an apple versus a branded packaged product, right? What I think that piece is less about, it's less about a grade and it's more about you have to pass a certain threshold to meet the consumer, demands, right? To get a green light for them to pick it up and put it in their cart.
So they're going to grade on a curve, you're saying, in the taste department by default.
I'm saying more so in appearance than taste.
Okay. Very good. Interesting.
Yeah.
And if it's a box product, you can make a box look pretty. That's not an issue, right? So, okay. So students, you definitely want to be working with Anthony. He grades. He's a little nicer teacher. You had those teachers you knew, and you always wish that you'd get the one versus I'm that other guy. Okay. So in the price range, okay, today, and most of the sphere that I'm interested, no, we're not. It's ridiculous.
We're a D. I'd give us a D.
I mean, depends on what it is. Regenerative grass-fed beef, we're 150, 175% of conventional, depending on market fluctions. Pasture-raised pork, 3x. Pasture-raised chicken, 5x, except for, we got that crazy down there with pasture bird that's making it more affordable. So fantastic for that. But yeah, D in that, I'm with you there. I wish it could be affordable.
Context is important though, right? Like we got to get some of the subsidies and some of the free money on our side. Like we're such a uphill battle there. And I don't know, like I don't claim to be an expert there, and it's not my role to be an expert there, but I know damn well, like at a high level, like we're just at a really adverse playing field, one. And two, my theory of change on the packaged food side is just, these are going to be premium priced products. And that's how we're going to have to build this market at the onset. Do we have to eventually solve for accessibility and price? Yes. But there is plenty of proof of concept to show that there's enough people that will pay that premium for us to build some really, really nice brands that can do the trailblazing work that build that more accessible ecosystem long-term.
Great point. And as far as subsidies go, I'm with you there, because essentially that consumer has already paid for a portion of that product prior to walking into the grocery store. So they've already paid for the conventional product through taxation and the Farm Bill and other subsidies and such. And they've also paid for it in the environmental externalized costs of conventional agriculture. Okay. Don't hate. I'm the guy that's going to get the hate mail now, not you, Anthony. So, but yeah, that's a key point. A person choosing Regen today is paying for it twice. They're paying for the conventional subsidization, and they're paying 100% of the costs of raising a Regen product. There should be, true Regen should be no externalized cost to the environment. All right, health and wellness. Now, here we go. We're going to finally get some good grades. And I would say in the regenerative produce space, I'm going to definitely give us an A minus. Okay. And in the meat space, I'm going to give us believe it or not, a B plus, because there's a wide range in how they're managed and such. And in the process space, I'm sorry, I hate processed food. It still gets an F because processed food's bad for you. So there you go. I'm a bad teacher. I can say that. You can't say that, Anthony, because that's your core. But go ahead. How do you grade on those?
Well, I would definitely push back on the processed food comment. I think it's all
junk.
It's the type of item and it's what's in it, right? To me, like I'm all for whole food ingredients, minimally processed ingredients that you can recognize.
Me too.
And I'd give us a more like generalized grade, right? And I'd give us a B plus or an A minus, right? Across, like we are delivering that. Where I'd give us an F actually on health and wellness is we are not marketing it well enough to the consumer, right? So I'll speak to the bias I have, which is on the brand side, which is we are in a lot of brands leading with the regenerative story that such a small part of the consumer base cares about. Less than 3% wants to solve climate change, wants to help the farmer, wants to do all those things. I wish more did care. I'm not saying that's not awesome. It is, but for us to really drive these businesses' revenue, like we have to lead with a what's in it for me takeaway for the consumer. It tastes awesome. It looks awesome. It's good for you. Like that's it. And so while I think
get it easily.
Right. Well, while I think our health and wellness benefits have an awesome grade, our marketing of them, I don't think has a good grade.
Good point. And in all fairness, I think traditional food gets a DNF in the health and wellness area. Okay. So
Yeah.
just as a comparison, what I was saying on the A- B+ is that I think we still have room for improvement in the
for sure.
health and wellness. So great points. This is kind of a fun discussion here. We've, both of us are secretly wanting to be professors and grade people. We've been hammered through our lives. So let's go to the convenience level. Convenience level for ReGen now. You have to, it's, I would say it's a little easier than being a deer hunter. Okay. Really, if you're looking to have a 100% regenerative food diet, good luck. You better be good at growing it, right? Because it's hard to access. Is that a fair statement? I mean, you can go to maybe a natural grocers and you still have to, hunt around in there. Or Whole Foods, you still have to hunt in there because that's largely organic driven, which is not regenerative. So convenience level, I think that's where we've probably failed the most. Would you agree? Or what's your grades? What's your grade?
Yeah. Once again, so much nuance across product type, right? But
Absolutely.
I'd give us a D+ across the board. And I do think that's rapidly improving. So I just put out a blog recently about some Nielsen IQ data, which is like one of the best providers of consumption and consumer data.
Good.
And regenerative agriculture is the fastest growing claim in CPG, right? So it being tagged onto products is happening at a very fast rate. We can talk about the integrity
as fast as we can. Yeah.
I was about to say, we can talk about the integrity of that, but what that does say is that the products are becoming more available and more noted as, claimed as regenerative, right? I think where we're the furthest from a national perspective is in livestock products, because it's much easier to manage and to claim that hero ingredient of chicken, pork, beef, etc. versus I have a 10 ingredient brand that, how do I get all of that regenerative, or how do I get 90+% of it to get the certification, or whatever that may be. So I do think those supply chains are going to be more challenging, right? The other success that we're seeing is supply chains and growing operations that can kind of commercialize the entire rotation. So a lot of the Central American, South American agroforestry, cacao, coffee rotation systems where they can sell everything in the rotation is very helpful. So there's all kinds of levers there. I think the products that we have are good, and I think that that's growing very fast. If you're a zealot like me that tracks 150+ of these brands and has the list on the website, then I think you can get to them at better than a D+. But the average consumer, it's for sure a D to a D+.
That's a great point. Thank you for clarifying that. The average consumer trying to find this, when they first, I typically see that people have a health event or a health scare, or a family member has a health event or scare. And then all of a sudden they start looking, and it's, like I said, it's about as easy as deer hunting. Right. So, so when you think about this, and I think this is a great point you make, Anthony, the 4 things that we have to do right to make it happen. The reason that regenerative is selling today is because the health and wellness grade score is so high that it's creating the pull through against the poor convenience, against the poor price point, and against that potential taste issue. That's the driver, right? So if we could just do some nominal improvement in those other 3 areas, I mean, this can explode. Correct? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, and I think even on the health and wellness side with the nutrient density piece, the work of people like the Bionutrient Food Association, the work that Eric Smith is doing at Audacious, the work that Tina Owens is now doing with the Nutrient Density Alliance. I mean, what all those folks are trying to do in different ways is basically produce more accessible, cheaper science that backs up that this food is better for all of us. And then we have to translate that for the farmers or the marketers or the brands or whoever that's telling that story to the consumer in a really concise and compelling narrative. And right now we can make the general claim, right? It's like, hey, our chicken's better. Okay, we know like studies say it has more vitamin, whatever. But when we can like really test that certain lot of chicken, and we can say, hey, the vitamin B12 per ounce versus the Tyson chicken looks like X, like that to me will be a game changer.
Exactly. So, and again, that's going to keep pushing that health and wellness story. We find that 85% of the people that buy from us, it's health related. They like the fact that it's ecosystem friendly. They like the fact that it's, welfare for the animal. They like the fact of, traditional farms, supporting community, all those other auxiliary things, but they're buying it for themselves. People do stuff for themselves. We're selfish. Imagine that. So, very, very interesting.
There's a regional aspect to that too. I think that's overall extremely true. But I do think the more you get to the coast, the sustainability is more of a purchasing driver, but it's still a very nominal small percentage, right? But you're exactly right.
Well, who just published a recent work that consumers are willing to spend 22% more on a product that has a 10% lower footprint? Did you hear that?
That specific stat I haven't seen, but in building, the thesis for the fund that we're about to go out and fundraise against, I've been knee deep in a lot of neck deep, actually, I guess I would say, in a lot of stats like that. And what we do know is we know that people will pay a higher price for sustainably produced goods. And we know that the category of sustainably produced goods is growing faster than their conventional counterparts. So in terms of driving dollars and growth, especially for the retailers, they want to focus on those brands because that's where their profitability is going to come from now and in the future. And we think that's, I think that is a core tenet to why this is an investable asset class that can make some good returns.
So talk to us a little bit more about Outlaw Ventures and you're in a raise for that right now. We have investors that listen to the podcast and like to know more about that. To me, I'm a part of a couple AgEmerge and Ag Startup Capital and those kind of things. And it's frustrating to me because I want to be a part of the ag tech emergence. Yeah. But a lot of things we see is just incremental improvement on the old system. And I've kind of had enough of that. I would love to be a part of something that's focusing on regenerative only. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that market sentiment or macro insight is part of the impetus for doing this, right? It's what have we done well in regen investing? We've done farmland well, and we've done ag tech VC. And we can have an argument about how regenerative it is it regenerative enough, blah, blah, blah. But if I showed you a list of the farmland funds, it's long, and the amount of money that's been invested is a lot. If I showed you the list of ag tech VCs, the list is long, and the amount invested is a lot. What we haven't done is we haven't invested in infrastructure and brands. And I'm not saying that the AUM of that investment maybe needs to match totally the upstream AUM, but right now it's not even close. Right. It's like 1,000 to 1, and that's not going to work. We're not going to have regenerative supply chains, supply webs, food systems, whatever, if we don't do that. And that's the impetus for Outlaw Ventures. And I think, Monty, I'll be very honest with the audience. Where we're at is we're still building the initial team, we're still building the strategy, and we're desiring to have the deck, the model, and the strategy fully baked out for beginning to fundraise in Q4. And we're asking ourselves a lot of hard questions, right? Because there's a tension point around venture capital, and here's what it is. One is it truly regenerative? Can you do it in a truly regenerative way? Right? On the brand side, consumer multiples are not of that of tech, right? They're typically going to trade at 3 to 5x, and they're going to have a lower success rate than a lot of the tech stuff that is going to trade at a 7 to 10 plus multiple. And so your shots on goal are just smaller, and your percentage exits are less, right? So can you truly produce a market rate return? I think we can, right? But me as a champion of the space, the other problem I want to go solve after we figure out fund one is we can only invest in 1 to 5%, the absolute best top of the line venture backable brands. And there's 95 to 99% of the investable universe they're great brands. They're doing great work. They're financeable. They're investable in terms of they can produce a return. Can they produce a venture return in the lifetime of the fund of 10 years? Probably not. And the reason we can't be as innovative on the financing side is because LPs, or the people with the real money that invest into the funds, they don't like complexity. They don't like nuance. They don't like to try things that haven't been proven out. And this hasn't been proven out, right? So I'm already selling them on this new idea of regenerative agriculture. I'm selling them on venture capital, regen CPG as a venture backable asset class. They don't want to hear about a longer time horizon. They don't want to hear about a reduced return. They want a very vanilla structure so they can write checks. With all that said, do I think we can do it and have success with Fund One? Yes. Do I think it solves all of the problems in the ecosystem? No. So trying to manage the tension of those two things.
Well, I think there's saturation in ag tech, like you were saying, both in money, and I think that saturation is, you hear about the climate corps, you hear about the Blue Rivers, you hear about a few of those things, but there's a ton that there's a lot of money being thrown at it. That is, the time horizon and the multiples are not that. And I think, what you've got is potentially be one of the first funds into this space that you're talking about, which gives you kind of a first mover advantage in the fund. So, and it may not be as exciting in those kind of things, but there's a lot of groups out there that want to invest in ReGen, or it's part of their, sustainable initiatives, or, it could be food companies that want to participate in it too. Come to think of it. So, to meet their goals. All right. So as we're kind of winding up here, paint the picture of your perfect future. Okay?
Oh man.
And tell me, because of what you are doing and your team that you lead and your contacts, connections, and all of your resources that you have at your disposal, when we sit down again in 10 years, if I'm alive, I'm a bad driver.
I hope so.
What is it going to look like? What is the success that you have created in this space in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I have a really simple North Star. It's the question that we ask all of our guests, all the brands that we have on our podcast, which is, how do we get ReGen brands to have 50% market share by 2050? Some people think that's really realistic. Some people think it's not possible. Some people are somewhere in the middle. Everyone has a very interesting response to that question. But that's my North Star. And I think it's going to be hard to get there. I think it's going to be complex to get there. I think it's going to be a lot of work to get there, a lot of collaboration. But I think we can. And I think, truth is on our side, and like what people really want in this world and from their food is on our side. We just got to make the rest of it work.
I have one modification I'm going to challenge you to on your North Star.
Yeah.
Don't shoot for 50%. It's got to be 51.
Okay.
All right.
So I like it.
Regenerative food has to be the primary
majority.
The way food is produced by 2050. So go for 51.
You
get 10% by 2040, you'll be there. And if you can get 10%, 17 years, 10%, that's attainable. So I think that that will definitely happen.
I got a question. I'm going to flip the question to you, Monty. What do you think we need to do to get 51%, market share by 2050?
Well, that's a beautiful part about being the co-host. I ask the questions. No. But okay. The food dollar votes. The person who's purchasing it determines what the system is. And they vote with their dollars, and they vote in the voting booth. So both of those things need to happen. We need to have a wholesale change in how we view food. And we also need to, think about food differently. Us Americans, compared to Europeans, I loved it. Italy yesterday announced that they banned all, fake food. They're not going to allow it at all. But go Italians, and they understand food and the beauty and the community around it. So it's going to take a lot of education to get the consumer to change how they vote. They change how they vote, everything else lines up. So it's is it supply driven or is it demand driven, right? Is it supply side economics or is this demand side? So back to you. What do you think?
I think you're spot on, and I think it's health driven. If you look at how what we're paying for healthcare in this country is eclipsing the growth rate of GDP, and just the burden of health. If you look at the burden of ecosystem health on, the way that we have all the externalities now, I want to say, I don't have the exact stat, but I got to say 90+% of the people that I talk to that work in regenerative agriculture across farmer, business person, investor, whatever, consumer, they all have a health story. They have a personal health problem, or they have a relative that has brought them to this work. And I hope we don't have to have large scale suffering to get us there. I hope we can kind of have that realization as a collective without that, but that might be what it takes. And I think I think the health angle is the linchpin. I think that's the key.
Well, at the growth rate of health-related events, if you plot out those curves, your 50% or 51% now is unfortunately not a big enough goal, because if health events bring us to this, by 2050, we've got some serious issues. At the growth rate of current health situations. So, very, very interesting. What else should we have visited about while we were together today, Anthony?
That's a good question. I don't know, man. This has been a great conversation. I just really appreciate it. It's great to chat with you, the legend himself, you know?
Oh, yeah, right. So, no, this is fun. And I really appreciate your perspective, because as a farmer, we kind of are aware of this stuff, and we know there's problems and such. And, but I love the fact that you are in just a full on press on these issues of the supply chain and getting it to the consumer. And we both need to work together to create a pull through, right? And educating that consumer in a cohesive way too, to where we make sure every dollar we're spending, we're making a maximum impact with that consumer. So
yeah,
fantastic work you're doing.
We a lot of times, in my opinion, create false binaries, and we make everything an either or, and everything in the regen space to me is an and right now. We just need to do all of it. It's a lot of ands. It's not a lot of either ors. So I don't want my focus on downstream and market building to be seen as like the upstream's not important. It's incredibly important. It's the whole point, right? But it's not an either or, it's an and. And I think the more people that we can just have step back and have that more macro wide view, like we're going to be in a really good spot.
And I think the thing we're going to have to really overcome is this need for labeling, because as soon as we create the national organic standards, we just stop the progress. You meet the standard and you're done. Regenerative is two things. It's a mindset, and it's a continuous improvement process. It's regenerative in its nature, right? So it's hard to make a book on a moving target. And
okay, I hear you.
Part of it.
I hear you. My question back to you then is, what's the market validation, right? Like how do you express it to the consumer at the grocery store if you don't do it with a certification or a label?
Well, I think the certification portion of it needs to be a continuous improving process, right?
Got it. Okay.
Authentication of it.
Yeah.
If anything,
Agreed.
organics probably stopped and backslidden.
Yeah.
I think that has to be a continuous improvement. Plus, I think, especially when it comes to ecosystem services and all those things, the benefit is if you take a farmer that's doing, an F and move them to a D, that's great. As long as move to the C,
right,
and B and an A in a certain amount of time, in the regenerative group, they're approaching it from that way. So I think there's a lot of hard look needs to be taken at this, but we can't just create a standard and we hit it, and when we're done, then we're back having this conversation again in 20 years. So anyway, thank you for all the hard work you're doing.
Appreciate it, man.
Right
back at you.
It's your time and effort and your dollars. You're putting your money where your mouth is, and that's what really counts. Appreciate
that. Thank you.
Awesome. And we'll have resources here on the description and everything. Check out their website. It is definitely, the blog posts that he referenced, and the podcast, and all the newsletter. I get that, all the other things that, that you can learn and just really get up to speed on what's going on in the regenerative food business. So thank you, Anthony, for all your hard work.
Thanks, Monty. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks for listening to this conversation today. It's exciting to learn how we can scale emerging brands that have ReGen built into their core. That's a food system that Anthony says he believes people want to support. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing to help growers move along that regenerative path, check out our website at asn.farm, and there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, X, aka Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.